Hi, I'm Chauncy Glover, and this is Look at This, LA's Black History. February is a month-long celebration of Black excellence. It's an opportunity to highlight the accomplishments of brave Black figures and their contributions to our country. So over the next half hour, myself, along with Desmond Shaw and Sky Cow, will dig a little deeper to retell the stories of some of LA's hidden figures and spotlight some culturally and historically significant sites for the Black community. From a bird's eye view in the sky to a first-person view on the ground, we examine the streets these Black pioneers walked, the places they performed, and where they were able to turn dreams into reality. We celebrate their successes and their struggles, like the fight to reclaim the first Black beach resort in Los Angeles. Desmond Shaw takes us to Bruce's Beach. Look at this.
We'll take a look at this coastline in the South Bay. This is Bruce's Beach, and this public park holds the story of a Black-owned beach resort in the early 20th century that was destroyed in the name of eminent domain. Now, the concept of eminent domain, forcing the sale of private land for the benefit of the public, has always been controversial and complicated. Dodger Stadium's a great example, which we've looked at before, and what happened here 100 years ago has recently been very well publicized because of the racial issues involved. And unfortunately, there's quite a few similar stories across the country. This all began back in 1912 when a Black couple named Charles and Willa Bruce bought a beachfront lot in what was then a sparsely populated Manhattan Beach. They paid about $1,200 for the property, and they built a resort for African Americans called Bruce's Beachfront. At that time, because of segregation, African Americans were not welcome at most beaches across the state, so this quickly became a haven for Black beachgoers and a successful business for the Bruces. And despite threats and harassments from white residents, other African Americans soon bought adjacent property to build their own beachfront homes. But according to the county's own website, in 1924, after a petition from white real estate agents and residents, the Manhattan Beach City Council voted to condemn the beach resort and surrounding Black-owned land in the name of eminent domain to build a city park. The Bruces fought it tooth and nail, but in the end they settled the matter for about $14,000, and the resort was torn down in 1927. But then the land sat vacant for almost 3 decades. A park wouldn't actually be built until 1956. A lifeguard training center followed that. A series of land transfers would eventually make the park the property of LA County. The park would go by several names, but was renamed Bruce's Beach in 2007 by Manhattan Beach's first Black mayor, Mitch Ward. According to NRDC.org, it was in 2020, after the civil unrest resulting from the murder of George Floyd, an organization called Justice for Bruce's Beach was formed to raise awareness about this story and see what could be done about it. This all got the attention of the LA County Board of Supervisors and the state Senate, and in the fall of 2021, a bill was passed to authorize the return of Bruce's Beach to Charles and Willa Bruce's descendants. At first, the family planned to lease the land back to the county, but in the end, they decided the best thing for them was to sell the land back to the county for $20 million. Supervisor Janice Hahn said that the sale would finally rebuild generational wealth that the family had been denied for nearly a century. A piece of coastline that's been as controversial as it is beautiful. Thanks to Mandy Richardson for telling me to check out Bruce's Beach.
Staying here at Bruce's Beach, Southern California is a breeding ground for competitive surfers, and you may be surprised to learn the largest growing population are Black surfers. KCAL's Rita Nakano shows us how the Black surf movement is creating some big waves off the shores of Los Angeles.
2 whole months.
I haven't been in the water so long.
For surfer Nathan Fluellen, that's too long to be away from the waves.
I've been living in LA for about 13 years, and I discovered surfing in 2017.
The Chicago transplant says a work project 7 years ago on the Zulu surf riders piqued his interest in the sport, but it was never in his purview until then.
Well, I saw Michael Jordan, so I asked my mother to put me in basketball camp, but I never asked her to put me in surfing camp because I didn't think that was something that Black people do.
Guy just got a little right.
William Lamar, who picked up a board 40 years ago, says Black and surfer were 2 words that just didn't go together.
When I was coming up, surfing was very localized. So if you didn't live at that particular break and you came there from another part of town trying to surf, you had problems.
When you think of the sport of surfing, you might imagine this guy as being the poster boy, a Caucasian man with beach blonde hair.
New statistics collected by the Surf Industry Members Association, or SEMA, shows 61% of the surf population is made up of Caucasians. Only 11% are Black. In the late 90s, it was much smaller. Still, Lamar created the Soul Surf Classic.
It was the first African-American to have a surf contest in the United States.
But he says with no large-scale sponsors, the event, which he self-funded, only lasted 5 years.
My wife was like, you want to pay for the surf contest or pay for the mortgage? I said, let's take care of the mortgage.
Fluellen says it wasn't until a few years ago that he felt the tide shifting.
It stemmed from the solidarity that the surf community showed when Aubrey Ahmaud, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd were killed.
As much as it was nice to see fellow black surfers at these memorial paddle outs, Fluellen says he wanted to meet under different circumstances. Yeah. That's why in 2020, he launched A Great Day in the Stoke, a celebration of their existence.
We held a surf competition.
Several thousand people from around the world joined and watched the contest.
That kind of blew my mind to see that many people of color in water at one time.
The same SEMA stats showed that over the past 5 years, black surfers had the largest growth, marking a 120% increase in its population. Lamar and Fluellen credit the legends who paved the way for their success.
Tony Corley, who's older, Rick Blocker, Sharon Schaefer. I'm excited that they get their roses.
Every year, A Great Day in the Stoke lands more sponsors. Advertisers are now featuring a diverse cast.
It was perfect.
The men say the hope is that this cultivates a new generation of black surfers.
You got Color the Water, you got the Black Surfers Collective, the Black Surfers Association.
They can say, oh, Mom, I want to go surf. And if the parent is like, oh, there's no black surfers, then they say, no, look, A Great Day in the Stoke.
So they won't be such a rare breed in the future.
Increase the opportunities to have the black version of Kelly Slater or the Michael Jordan of surfing.
Picture it, 1928, Central Avenue bustling and booming with jazz. If you were a black socialite in LA, every Saturday night you were here at the Dunbar Hotel. It was the place to be and the place to be seen.
This sign right here is a treasure itself.
Icon, the Dunbar is famous from all over the world. This is where everything happened at. You had the Alabama Club, the Cotton Club, and all the musicians came here. Lena Horne, Billie Holiday, Duke Ellington, everybody that was great stayed here at this hotel.
They call London Carter the ambassador of Dunbar Village, an affordable housing community for the elderly, formerly known as the Dunbar Hotel. And every day, London says he gets to step into black history.
And I've been loving it too.
He's lived here for 10 years and does all the tours, touting the building's significance.
Welcome to the Dunbar Historic Jazz Hotel.
Through pictures, this piano, and other priceless mementos, the history is still very much alive here.
Everybody that was somebody stayed at the Dunbar.
It was the heart of LA's black community. The Dunbar Hotel opened in 1928. It was first known as Hotel Somerville, named after its builders John and Beta Somerville, the first African Americans to attend and graduate from USC School of Dentistry. The Somervilles were some of the most socially and politically important people in the LA black community at the time. After founding the LA chapter of the NAACP, the story goes John was denied lodging on every turn on a trip to San Francisco. Fed up and tired of being treated like a second-class citizen, Somerville decided to build his own first-class hotel for black customers, especially black musicians. They stayed and played here and made the Dunbar the center of a thriving Central Avenue jazz scene.
People of color, they could perform in Beverly Hills, but they couldn't eat in Beverly Hills and they couldn't get rooms in Beverly Hills. They had to stay here at the Dunbar.
Now, it wasn't the first black hotel here in the Central Avenue corridor, but it would be regarded as the nicest, with custom furniture, a cafe, and a restaurant, a beauty parlor, and beautiful rooms.
A lot of stuff happened in this lobby. A lot of meetings came here for civil rights. They was changing laws, they was changing history.
The Dunbar hosted the first national convention of the NAACP in the Western U.S. However, after only a year of ownership, the Somervilles would lose the hotel after the stock market crash of 1929.
The young lawyers that brought it, they renamed the Somerville the Dunbar after a poet.
Poet Paul Laurence Dunbar. Dazzling dresses and dancing took center stage here. According to the LA Times, in the 40s and 50s, the club hosted the creme de la creme of black society. But sadly, the hotel fell on turbulent times from the mid-50s to the 80s and changed ownership several times, but struggled to make money as more modern hotels finally started to allow black guests. By the 80s, the building had been declared a historic landmark, And today, London tells me he loves the fact that history is even evident outside of his historic home.
Tell me more about the significance of this mural.
These are people that service the city. You have the first black mayor, Mayor Tom Bradley. We write on the backs of these beautiful black people here.
And we're staying right here in the Central Avenue corridor as our Desmond Shaw takes us a few blocks up the street to a place that some called the West Coast Apollo.
Well, take a look at this building south of downtown LA. It is the Lincoln Theater in the historic Central Avenue corridor. It's the last remaining theater that was built specifically for the African-American community. Approaching its 100th birthday, the Moorish Revival building opened in 1927 as a grand movie palace with seating for 2,100 people centered around an orchestra pit and a large stage. So when we look back at Los Angeles at that point of the 20th century, obviously things were a lot different than they are today. During the roaring 20s, Broadway and downtown was abuzz with movie theaters, live stage productions, but African-Americans were either barred from those theaters, or if they were allowed in, it would be in separate segregated sections. In response, the Central Avenue corridor about a mile south of downtown became a cultural hub for the black community with a number of businesses built specifically for them. The area flourished from the 1920s through the 50s, according to the book Black Los Angeles, American Dreams and Racial Realities. That included a skating rink, a cigar stand, the billiard hall, the 28th Street YMCA, companies for real estate and insurance, several thriving theaters, including the Globe, the Tivoli, and this, the Lincoln Theater, the largest of the entertainment venues on Central Avenue. By all accounts, it was a smash hit, beginning with the invitation-only opening night premiere. Although it was built for the African-American community, it attracted people of all colors for the level of entertainment that was on display here. Many top Hollywood talent of the era performed here, like Charlie Chaplin and Janet Gaynor. Beginning in the 1930s, all the top black musicians of the time sold out the Lincoln, including Duke Ellington, Lionel Hampton, the Nat King Cole Trio, Billie Holiday, Fats Domino, B.B. King, so many more. The theater's reputation grew so much that, according to the LA Conservancy, it became common to hear it referred to as the West Coast Apollo, after the Harlem-storied Apollo Theater. Many of the top artists of the day performed at both theaters. However, the music came to an end in the early 1960s, and the theater was sold in 1962 to be used as a house of worship for a Christian church. It was known as the Crouch Temple for Bishop Samuel Crouch. Then it was converted to a mosque in 1970 by the black Muslim community. Since that first sale, it has been used for religious purposes ever since. These days, it is used by a Spanish-speaking religious congregation. It became a protected Los Angeles historic cultural landmark in 2003 and added to the National Registry of Historic Places in 2009. Nearly 100 years old and a monument to the historic Central Avenue corridor, the historic Lincoln Theater.
This Victorian bungalow here in historic South Central LA is no ordinary house. As a matter of fact, something very extraordinary came from here. This is the childhood home of the first person of color to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. A green door and a lemon tree sprawling over the front lawn. Without this commemorative plaque, you wouldn't know this is a landmark in African American history. It was the childhood home of Ralph J. Bunche. Bunche was born in Detroit and had a pretty turbulent childhood. His father mostly absent, so he was raised by his mother and uncle until they both died in 1917. And at 13 years old, he moved here to LA.
He grew up here with his grandma.
Thomas Buckley Mitchell now lives in the historic home with his wife and 3-year-old son.
Do you ever walk through your house and think, Ralph Bunche?
Where's the ghosts?
Yeah, like he walked these very same...
Yeah, it could be the same floors.
The family bought the house 7 years ago.
I really honestly didn't know much about Ralph Bunche before moving in here.
The house sat vacant for almost a decade until the nonprofit Dunbar Economic Development Corporation was able to buy the house in 1996, transforming it into the Ralph Bunche Peace and Heritage Center, serving as a meeting place and museum dedicated to his life. Unfortunately, the museum was short-lived.
But like, it's got him.
But nestled between the Mitchell family photos are Bunche's pictures left behind. The family kept them here.
The fact that he was here and this is his place was very important to like keep remembering and let and share with the community.
Despite Bunche's early hardships, he would go on to be the valedictorian at nearby Jefferson High School. And get this, Buckley Mitchell now teaches physics at Nava Academy, which is housed right inside of Jefferson High. He walks to school every morning, just as Bunche did.
when I take that walk, I think like, oh, this is like what he did every day.
Bunch would go on to be the valedictorian at UCLA, which now has all of the museum's artifacts on display. That accomplishment was only the beginning for Bunch. He went on to be the first African American to be awarded a PhD in political science from an American university, Harvard. Bunch became one of the most important diplomats of the 20th century. He was instrumental in the formation of the United Nations. Then in 1950, came the coveted Nobel Peace Prize for his role in negotiating an armistice that ended the Arab-Israeli War. He also helped in a ceasefire that ended hostilities between India and Pakistan. With all of these achievements, Ebony magazine proclaimed Bunch may have been the most influential African American of the first half of the 20th century. Bunch died in New York only 6 months after retiring from the UN in 1971. But back in South LA, this local landmark gives cultural context to the neighborhood. Where you end up doesn't depend on where you start. A lesson Mitchell Buckley says he's passing down to his little one.
I feel very fortunate we have a small son. He's 3 years old, and having him live here as well and grow up in that same sort of like environment. People like him that came from, you know, that had such struggles in the time that he was in, and to be such an amazing person that he was. Really, I think it's good to be able to have those kinds of role models and to be able to look back at these people and say, look, this is a person that did some amazing things, and you know, you can too.
Well, take a look at this old restored building. This is the African-American Firefighter Museum, and it is the first and only freestanding museum dedicated to African Americans in the fire service in the country. Housed inside old Fire Station 30 on Central Avenue just outside of downtown, this was one of only 2 fire stations in Los Angeles where African Americans were allowed to serve between the 1920s and 50s. According to the museum and LAist, the history of black firefighters goes back to the late 1800s and a former slave from Virginia named Sam Haskins. He only fought fires for 3 years, though, from 1892 until 1895, and he lost his life that year responding to a fire. Others soon joined the ranks. Some of the other pioneers included 5 men who were also Tuskegee Airmen. At this museum, you'll learn the amazing story of George Bright, one of the first black firefighters to rise to the rank of lieutenant. He was moved here with 4 other black firefighters in the early 1900s when this area was predominantly white, and even after the Supreme Court's historic ruling in 1955 that ended segregation, things were far from easy for LA's black firefighters. They're stories of immense hostility and discrimination that these men and women were met with, being forced to eat separately from their white counterparts and having to provide their own kitchen supplies and utensils. It wasn't until photos of all this were taken and given to the media that things finally began to improve. The station would continue to provide service to the city until 1980, and then it was closed after earthquake damage was discovered, and it sat empty into the 1990s until former firefighter Arnett Hartsfield Jr. approached the city with the idea of turning it into a museum. He had also led fire station integration efforts back in the 1950s. After an extensive rehabilitation and after being declared a city and national historic landmark, it opened to the public in 1997. On display inside, besides the amazing individual stories, you'll also find vintage engines and lots of memorabilia and artifacts. They also offer tours and workshops, and they have a school-based program through their Junior Fire Cadet and Future Firefighters program. To plan your visit and learn more about this excellent and unique museum, visit aaffmuseum.org. Taking a look at this from SkyCal, I'm Desmond Shaw.
Desmond, thanks for that look from above. Now take a walk with me. I want to bring you here inside of the museum to give you a more in-depth look.
I'm Brent Burton, historian, African-American Firefighting Museum.
Meet Brent Burton, retired LA County fire captain, co-founder and historian for the museum. He revels in the resounding resilience of these brave firefighters, like Sam Haskins, a former slave.
He's our first African-American firefighter and the first to die in the line of duty for LA Fire. We didn't even know he existed until 2002 when the Times told us about him. So apparently he came on the fire department in 1892,
worked down in East LA area, and responding to a fire around November of 1895, he was killed when there was an accident and he lost his balance and fell.
Among the vintage fire cart, old uniforms, helmets, art, and artifacts is this replica of the first fire pole.
What folks don't know is the fire pole was invented by Chicago firefighters in 1878. Engine 21, an all-black engine company, is known for creating the first fire pole in history.
The experience here at the museum is immersive. It gives you the opportunity to step back in time.
In the front room, which was the recreation room, is where all our chiefs and women in the fire service are. And then the back side, we have what's called the international room, which highlights firefighters outside of LA.
How important is it for us to keep this history of black firefighters alive?
Very important. It's what we consider momentum of memory. If you lose your history, you lose your power. So we want to make sure that people know what has transpired here, what it took to see the fire service today in the integrated setting where people have diversity. We enjoy a woman fire chief. We've had black fire chiefs in the past. Those things weren't possible if it wasn't for black firefighters back in the day proving that we belonged here.
If you have an interesting location you'd like Desmond to check out, just email us at lookatthis@cbs.com. Thank you so much for joining us for this special edition of Look at This as we took a look at LA's Black history. I'm Chauncy Glover.